Today, we're diving into a really fascinating legal showdown from almost a century ago. It's a story that pits one judge's promised retirement pension against the immense power of a governor's veto pen. So let me ask you this. Imagine a new law gets passed. You agree with, let's say, 90% of it, but there's one little part that you just can't stand. If you were in charge, could you sign that law but just, take a pen and cross out the one piece you don't like? Well, that's the exact question at the very heart of the story we're unpacking today. To really get what this whole constitutional battle is about, we have to start with the man right in the middle of it all. His name was Juan Bengzon, a judge whose long, quiet career was about to crash head-on into the immense power of the executive branch. So, Juan Bengzon had served for a very long time. He was first appointed as a justice of the peace way back in 1912. Now, let's fast forward a couple of decades to 1933. After all that service, he hits age 65, and a new law says he has to retire. But here's where the timing gets absolutely crucial. Just over a month after he's forced to retire, a brand new law is passed, Act No. 4051. And this law promises a retirement pension to justices in his exact situation. You can imagine, after a whole career, he was counting on that.
And then, just like that, the story takes a sharp turn. The Governor General at the time picked up his pen, and in an instant, everything changed for Judge Bengzon. This is where a simple pension case turns into a constitutional minefield.
So the tool the Governor General used is called the item veto. Now, this isn't your standard all-or-nothing veto. The item veto is a much more surgical tool. It lets a leader look at a bill, especially a spending bill, and act like an editor. They can say, yep, I like this part, but this part right here? Nope, I'm striking it out. They can kill one piece of a law without killing the whole thing. And this is the exact part he crossed out, Section 7, the one sentence in the entire law that made sure judges like Juan Bengzon were included. With just one stroke of that pen, Bengzon's retirement security, poof, it was gone. So what do you think he did? He sued. And that lawsuit sparked a massive legal firestorm that went all the way to the Supreme Court. The core question was simple but huge. Was what the Governor General did even legal? Could this veto actually be unconstitutional? So here's the puzzle the court had to solve. The law of the land, the Organic Act, said the governor could veto specific items inside an appropriation bill. So the entire case hung on the definitions of those two phrases. Was this pension law an appropriation bill? And was that little Section 7 a vetoable item? Let's just quickly nail these two terms down, because they are everything here. An appropriation bill is just any law that directs the government to spend money. An item is supposed to be a distinct, separable piece of that spending. Let's use a grocery list analogy. The whole list is the bill. Milk, bread, eggs, those are items. The big question for the court was, is Section 7 eggs, or is it more like a note on the list that says, make sure the eggs are organic? Okay, the stage is set. The court has to figure this out. So let's look at how the majority of the justices saw it. Here's the argument that won the day. For the majority, the logic was pretty direct. First, was this an appropriation bill? They said, yes, absolutely. Why? Because it had a Section 10 that explicitly set aside money from the Treasury. That's an appropriation. End of story. Second question, was Section 7 an item? Again, they said yes. They saw it as its own separate piece. The money for those specific justices could be easily calculated and separated from the total. To them, it was just one more line on the budget that could be crossed right off. And this quote right here from Justice Malcolm really gets to the core of their thinking. What he's basically saying is, look, the legislature passed the bill. The governor vetoed a part of it. And you know what? The legislature didn't fight back. They didn't try to override the veto. In other words, the two political branches were on the same page. So who is the court to jump in and mess up that agreement? But hold on, because not everyone on the court was buying that argument. Not by a long shot. A really powerful dissenting opinion painted a completely different picture of the law and of the governor's power. The dissenters looked at the very same law and came to the exact opposite conclusions. Was it an appropriation bill? They said, no way. This is a gratuity law, a policy law, that just happens to have a single funding line tacked on at the end. The item veto, they argued, is for big budget bills with lots of different spending items you can pick from. And was Section 7 an item? To them, absolutely not. Section 7 didn't set aside a single dollar. It was a condition. It was the make sure the eggs are organic note. And you can't veto a note. You can only veto the money for the eggs themselves.
And they didn't just pull this idea out of thin air. They pointed to a case from Mississippi, State v. Holder, where the exact same thing happened. A governor there tried to approve money for a college, but vetoed all the strings that the legislature had attached to the money. And that court said, nope, unconstitutional. The executive can't just take the money and throw out the rules. They can veto the funding, sure, but they can't cherry-pick the conditions. For the dissenters, this was their smoking gun.
And wow, this quote from Justice Villarreal, it's a gut punch. He is firing off a serious warning here. He's saying that if the court just rolls over and defers to the other branches, it's failing at its most important job. Its job is to be the guardian of the Constitution, not just an accomplice when it looks like the other branches are bending the rules.
So there you have it. Two totally compelling, completely opposite arguments, a real clash over the fundamental balance of power. But at the end of the day, in a court of law, somebody has to win.
And the verdict came down. The Supreme Court sided with the majority. They ruled against Juan Bengzon. The Governor General's action was declared perfectly legal. The red pen won. So you might be thinking, okay, interesting old case, but why does it still matter today? Well, for one, it cemented a very broad, very powerful interpretation of the executive's veto power. It also reinforced this idea that courts should hesitate before stepping into a fight that the other two branches have already settled. But maybe the biggest takeaway is that these high-level debates are never just academic. They have real-world consequences. A single line crossed out in a bill changed Judge Bengzon's life forever and helps define the limits, or lack thereof, of government power for generations. And all of this leaves us with a fundamental question that people still argue about all the time. In this complicated dance of making laws, who really gets the last word? Is it the lawmaker who sweats over every detail and condition? Or is it the executive who, at the end of the day, holds the pen? It's something worth thinking about.